What would you do if you were 7 years old? Your mother collapsed unconscious on the floor, and in your panic, you dialed the wrong number for help. Little Emma Martinez faced exactly that terrifying moment on a Tuesday afternoon in Phoenix, Arizona. She meant to call 911, but in her shaking hands, she misdialed and instead reached Dr. James Sullivan, a pediatric surgeon who'd just finished a 30-hour shift and was about to silence his phone. What happened in the next 12 minutes didn't just save Emma's mother's life. It revealed why one man's choice to answer an unknown number became the difference between a child losing her mother and a family staying together. This is the true story of a wrong number that turned out to be exactly right. Emma Martinez was doing homework at the kitchen table while her mother, Isabel, prepared dinner. It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in their small Phoenix apartment. Emma working on math problems, Isabel chopping vegetables while music played softly from her phone. Then, without warning, Isabel collapsed to the floor, her body seizing in convulsions as Emma screamed her mother's name. At 7 years old, Emma had been taught what to do in emergencies. Call 911, stay calm, tell them what's wrong. But in that moment of absolute terror, watching her mother's eyes roll back and her body shake uncontrollably, Emma's training collided with panic. Emma grabbed her mother's phone with trembling hands, trying to remember the pattern she'd been taught. 911. But her fingers were shaking so badly that instead of 911, she dialed 941, not even realizing her mistake as she hit the call button and held the phone to her ear with both hands, praying someone would answer. On the third ring, someone did. "Hello," said a male voice, clearly tired and confused about who was calling. Emma started crying and talking so fast the words tumbled over each other. "Please help me. My mommy fell down, and she's shaking and her eyes are weird, and I don't know what to do, and I'm scared, and please, please, please help me." Dr. James Sullivan had just finished a 30-hour shift in the pediatric surgical unit at Phoenix Children's Hospital. He'd completed 2 emergency surgeries, handled 3 consultations, and was so exhausted he could barely drive home. He'd pulled into his driveway, was about to silence his phone and collapse into bed when an unknown number called. His first instinct was to let it go to voicemail, probably a telemarketer or wrong number. But something made him answer, maybe the particular exhaustion that makes you stop caring about normal filtering and just respond automatically. When he heard Emma's panicked voice describing her mother's symptoms, his medical training immediately overrode his exhaustion. This child was describing what sounded like a seizure, and she was alone and terrified. "Sweetheart, I need you to take a deep breath and listen to me very carefully," Dr. Sullivan said, his voice shifting from tired confusion to calm authority. "My name is Dr. James, and I'm going to help you. First, is your mommy still shaking?" Emma looked at her mother through tears. "No, she stopped, but she won't wake up, and she's breathing funny." Dr. Sullivan's mind was already running through protocols: post-seizure state, altered breathing pattern, child alone without other adults. "Emma, you're doing amazing. I need you to tell me your address so I can send help to you right now. Can you do that for me?" Emma recited their address, which she'd been made to memorize for exactly this kind of emergency, and Dr. Sullivan was already dialing 911 on his second phone while keeping Emma on the line. While paramedics were dispatched to Emma's address, Dr. Sullivan stayed on the phone, talking Emma through critical steps that would later be credited with saving Isabel's life. He had Emma check if her mother was breathing. She was, but it sounded labored and irregular. He walked Emma through the recovery position, explaining in child-friendly terms how to gently turn her mother on her side so she wouldn't choke if she vomited. He asked about medication bottles, learning that Isabel was diabetic and had recently been struggling to afford her insulin. Information that immediately told Dr. Sullivan this was likely a diabetic seizure caused by severely low blood sugar, a life-threatening emergency that needed immediate treatment. "Emma, this is very important. I need you to go to the kitchen and find something very sweet, juice, honey, syrup, anything with lots of sugar. Can you do that?" Emma ran to the kitchen, still holding the phone, and found a bottle of apple juice. Dr. Sullivan talked her through the dangerous process of trying to get liquid into an unconscious person's mouth without causing choking. Tiny amounts placed between the cheek and gum, head tilted to the side, watching carefully for any swallowing reflex. It was a desperate measure that medical professionals rarely recommend because of aspiration risks. But Dr. Sullivan knew that without intervention, Isabel could suffer brain damage or death before paramedics arrived, and the potential benefit outweighed the risk given the circumstances. "You're being so brave, Emma. Your mommy is so lucky to have you," Dr. Sullivan said, keeping his voice steady and warm even as he was mentally calculating time frames and risks. He kept Emma talking, asking about school and her favorite subjects, anything to keep her focused and calm while they waited for paramedics. He explained what the paramedics would do when they arrived so Emma wouldn't be scared of the strangers rushing into her home with equipment. He asked about other family members and learned Emma's father had died 2 years earlier in a car accident, making Isabel a single mother with no other immediate family in the area, which meant Emma had been completely alone with no one else to call. 9 minutes after Emma's initial call. Though it felt like hours, paramedics arrived and took over Isabel's care. Dr. Sullivan stayed on the phone until he heard the professionals taking charge, then said goodbye to Emma with a promise. "Emma, I'm going to come check on you and your mommy at the hospital, okay? You did everything right. You saved your mommy's life today." After hanging up, Dr. Sullivan sat in his car for a moment processing what had just happened. A wrong number. A wrong number that wasn't wrong at all, but instead connected a terrified child to exactly the right person with exactly the right knowledge to guide her through saving her mother's life. He didn't go to bed. Instead, he drove to the hospital where Isabel had been transported. Isabel Martinez regained consciousness in the emergency room, confused and disoriented but stable. She'd experienced a severe hypoglycemic seizure caused by skipping insulin doses because she couldn't afford her medication and had been rationing what little she had left. The paramedics confirmed that the small amount of juice Emma had managed to administer, guided by Dr. Sullivan's instructions, had likely prevented permanent brain damage or death by providing just enough glucose to keep Isabel's brain functioning until professional help arrived. The ER doctor told Isabel bluntly, "Your daughter saved your life, and the person who guided her saved both of you." When Dr. Sullivan arrived at the hospital and found Emma in the waiting room with a neighbor who'd been called to stay with her, Emma ran to him and hugged him with the fierce intensity of a child who'd just survived the worst experience of her young life. "You kept your promise. You came," she said, crying into his shirt. Dr. Sullivan knelt down to her level. "I always keep my promises. And you kept yours too. You stayed calm and helped your mommy, even though you were scared. That's what heroes do." Isabel, able to receive visitors shortly after, met the stranger who'd answered her daughter's wrong number, and she couldn't speak through her tears for several minutes. Finally, she managed. "How do I thank someone for my life? For my daughter not being orphaned? What words exist for that?" Dr. Sullivan did more than just answer a wrong number. He helped Isabel navigate the medical system to access programs that provided affordable insulin. He connected Emma with a child therapist specializing in trauma, because watching your parent nearly die leaves lasting psychological impacts that need professional support. He checked on them periodically over the following months, not as a doctor, but as someone who'd become part of their story and genuinely cared about their well-being. Isabel later said, "That wrong number was God or the universe or whatever you believe in making sure my daughter reached exactly who she needed to reach. One digit off from 911, but somehow she got someone even better, someone who could talk a terrified 7-year-old through saving her mother's life." The story attracted local media attention, highlighting both the medical emergency and the broader crisis of insulin affordability that had caused Isabel's life-threatening situation. According to the American Diabetes Association, 1 in 4 people with diabetes ration insulin due to cost, a decision that can lead to exactly the kind of medical emergency Isabel experienced. Dr. Sullivan used the attention to advocate for better access to life-saving medications, arguing that no one should face death or disability because they can't afford treatment for a manageable chronic condition. Emma and Isabel became advocates too, sharing their story at healthcare policy hearings and fundraising events for diabetes support organizations. This story reminds us that life's most important moments often hinge on small decisions that seem inconsequential at the time. Dr. Sullivan's choice to answer an unknown number when he was exhausted and could easily have let it go to voicemail became the difference between Emma losing her mother and Isabel surviving to raise her daughter. How many times do we ignore unknown calls, assuming they're not important, never knowing whether the person on the other end desperately needs help? This isn't a suggestion to answer every spam call, but it's a reminder that sometimes what seems like an interruption is actually the universe putting you exactly where you're needed most. Emma's story also highlights the critical importance of teaching children emergency procedures and making sure they know how to seek help when adults can't. Emma had been trained to call 911, and while she misdialed in her panic, she'd been taught well enough to know she needed to call someone and articulate what was wrong. That training, combined with luck and Dr. Sullivan's compassion, saved her mother's life. Every child should know their address, how to call for help, and basic emergency information about their parent health conditions. That knowledge becomes the difference between tragedy and survival in crisis moments like Emma faced. The deeper lesson is about showing up for strangers when we have the capacity to help. Dr. Sullivan didn't have to stay on the phone. He didn't have to talk Emma through emergency care. He didn't have to visit the hospital or follow up afterward. But he did all those things because he recognized that his knowledge and his willingness to help made the difference in whether a child lost her mother. We all have knowledge, skills, or resources that could help someone in crisis if we're willing to show up when we're needed. The question is whether we'll answer the call, literally and metaphorically, when it comes. Like and subscribe for more true stories about unexpected heroes and moments where everything hung on a single choice. Comment about times when a stranger helped you in crisis, or when you helped someone who desperately needed it. And remember, answer the unknown call sometimes. Check on neighbors who live alone. Teach children emergency procedures. Use whatever skills you have to help when you can. Because somewhere right now, a 7-year-old is dialing a wrong number that could be exactly right if the person on the other end chooses to answer and help. Be the person who answers.